Welcome to Uncolored. I'm Kevin Metcalf, and as promised, we're going to get into this controversy over the NFL running backs that they have with the league, feeling that apparently they're not making the money that they think that they should. And one advocate of this is a guy named Johnathan Hutton. He's a radio host. He does a show on the Outkick network. Fantastic guy, Johnathan Hutton. Love Johnathan Hutton. Love Chad Withrow. They're both fantastic on Hot Mic. And so I'm going to critique Johnathan Hutton's opinion on this matter. Now, this is not about Johnathan Hutton or really even about the running backs. This is about some of the assertions that are made, and we're going to look at it in a more global perspective. And we're going to look at it through the lens of what I talked about last week regarding the masculine and feminine lenses. You can even, I framed it as a masculine and feminine lens, but you can even frame it as a right brain, left brain kind of thing. The more analytical side of you and the more, creative side. But on this graph, this is just a general graph that you'll see in a lot of different places, or a similar graph. This isn't the definitive one. But what we're going to look at least what I'd like you to do is look at what Johnathan Hutton says, and my critique of it, in light of these two perspectives. The feminine mind, which is more intuitive, more internal, which means more subjective. The judgment of right or wrong or good or bad or correct or incorrect is an internal judgment. It's more subjective. Whereas the masculine energy tends to be more logical and external, meaning that the judge of whether something is correct or not is based on how well your ideas, your behavior matches with some objective thing out there in the world. That's really what the objective thing means, at least as I understand it. So here's Johnathan Hutton talking about the running backs. And I just want you to know, this is like a couple of weeks ago. And Johnathan Hutton is talking like the day after Nick Chubb, who was running back for the Cleveland Browns, has a serious injury, a really horrific injury where his leg goes backwards. And Johnathan Hutton is reacting to this. The reason I say that is because the context matters in which he's making these statements. So let's take a look at what Johnathan Hutton has to say.
And to awful injury, and it has sparked the running back debate and the salary, the money, the franchise tag, the discrepancy in pay versus other skilled positions. They're at $8 million off. The only position lower, kicker, punter, long snapper, grouped together there. That would receive less on a tag based on the structure of the salary cap, and that's through the CBA. That was collectively bargained.
So I just wanted to stop it there to emphasize the point that, just like Johnathan Hutton said, whatever they're complaining about, they agreed to. The running backs I'm talking about. Any player, forget about it. The collectively bargained agreement, the CBA, I guess it's the NFLPA, they've got lawyers, legal representation, they've got agents. All of these people and get together and decide this is what we're going to do going forward. Okay, I'm not saying everybody was happy with it. I'm simply saying they agreed to it. That's the point that I wanted to make, and it's very important moving forward. As a matter of fact, I'm going to cut out Jonathan's legs from under him, but everything that you're going to hear Johnathan say, everything was known ahead of time. Before any contract was signed by any player, everything he's going to tell you was known ahead of time. I just wanted to make that point clear. All right, let's continue.
CBA, that was collectively bargained. But last night's injury to Chubb on Monday night, that is exactly the reason why running backs have an argument to be heard. And quite frankly, I agree with them on where they're coming from here, because it's the only position where a player can take a hit like that and it's deemed clean and not penalized, fined, doesn't hurt your team.
So I would challenge Hutton, and this is great. If you just watch this past weekend of college football, maybe in the NFL too, I'm not sure. I don't watch football like I used to. I watch the highlights from on YouTube. They'll have different folks who have highlights of some of the games, condensed versions, that kind of thing. So I don't see every play of every game, but they show some of the big plays. But without seeing every play of every game, I would challenge that assertion that only running backs get hit like this. I think it's objectively false if you look at the film of just this past weekend. Forget about the whole football year or last year. Okay? Anybody running the football, this can happen to. Seems to me. So I just want to make that clear. Let's go. Let's keep going.
It's just a bad circumstance that the injury occurred. I'm not saying it's a dirty hit, by the way, but there is no concept of a defenseless running back. You can't necessarily just randomly hit a wide receiver like that when he's not having the football and get away with it.
Of course not.
But from a running back perspective, they're looking at wide receiver going, there's a defenseless receiver. There's no defenseless running back. You can take them out at any point, and it's just deemed part of the position.
So he's right. You cannot hit the wide receiver like that when he's not holding the ball, like Johnathan Hutton said. Of course you can't. This is all feminine energy, in my humble opinion. That feminine side of you, in my opinion, or you can go again, left brain, right brain, doesn't matter. But if you look at the feminine mindset as that part of you that seeks to preserve and elevate your value as a human being, oftentimes it will distort or cut out objective data that doesn't affirm you. And this, in my opinion, is a distortion. The things that I'm saying, the objections that I'm making to some of the things that Johnathan Hutton is saying, Johnathan Hutton would make himself. I think if Johnathan Hutton took a step back, he'd go, yeah, you're right. Any player could get hit. When he's talking about the different rules for different players, yeah, he knows that. And he knows why that is. But he's not looking at that. He's looking at it again from a woe is me, let me give you a big bear hug and hug all your problems away, and put a dollar sign on it, as if putting a dollar sign on any of this would make any difference. And here's what I mean. Let's say if let's say that the week before this happened to Nick Chubb, and this is like 2 weeks ago again. So 3 weeks ago, Nick Chubb goes to the Browns. Browns go, you know what? We're going to triple your salary. Whatever that is. I don't even know what it is. Would this injury to Nick Chubb, would Johnathan Hutton suddenly go, no big deal, right? Would Johnathan Hutton have seen this thing on Monday night, the guy's leg bend the opposite way? Would Johnathan Hutton's reaction be going, well, he's making way more money now, so it's all good? Of course not. It doesn't matter how much money you're making. That's a horrific injury. And that's the point. That's the problem between trying to put a dollar value on something that can't be quantified. Injury to somebody, your emotions, how you feel, what you think, those kinds of things. You can't put a dollar value on those, at least not an accurate assessment of the value of those things. The masculine side cannot put a value on human value. They can't accurately assess those things. What Johnathan Hutton's trying to do is to get a dollar figure to somehow make this all be okay. And I don't think that that's possible. Even if there's a number that Nick Chubb would go, well, listen, if you gave you gave me $100 million, I wouldn't have a problem with it. I don't know. I mean, would you have a problem with somebody busting your leg backwards? Probably. It would make it easier to do. But is that the value of you getting your leg bent backwards? That's the question. And if it is, why is it that number and not a different number? That's the problem with trying to put a dollar value on the things that Hutton is talking about. Hutton is talking about things that are emotional, personal feelings, and it's that kind of thing that doesn't really lend itself to be put to having a dollar value put on, at least so far. Maybe he'll bring something else. I don't know.
Even kickers and punters are protected more by the rules. We certainly know about quarterback, and the line of scrimmage has certainly changed on rules that that they enforce that you can and can't do now, either going low or using certain blocks on kickoff returns.
Okay, let's talk about this. Are the rules different for different players on the football field? 100% yes. Is there a good reason for it? 100% yes. Okay, now back in the day when I used to watch football, there were no different rules. If you had the ball, it could just get really bad for you. That's just the way it was. But the NFL, player safety, they're going to a passing game. They've changed the rules. That's just what they've done. Love it, hate it, indifferent, doesn't matter. That's just the facts. Well, why have they changed the rules for certain players? Well, they figured out that a quarterback isn't like a running back because the quarterback is looking downfield oftentimes. They're in a throwing motion. So they're open to getting blown up by some 350-pound edge rusher coming in and just knock them out, even though they can't tackle them like they used to. Listen, it still ain't fun. Again, take a look at this past week of football and you'll see. What about the wide receiver? Same problem. Wide receiver's looking behind him. When the ball is coming, they're looking behind them, oftentimes jumping in the air. They can't defend themselves from oncoming defenders. So the rules are different in that circumstances. Punters and kickers, exact same thing. When they have the ball, they're focused straight on the ball, looking down oftentimes, and then when they kick it, they got one leg in the air for a good amount of time. They can't defend themselves from oncoming defenders. So they've given them a different kind of rule when they're kicking. But when the punter, kicker, wide receiver, running back, when they get that ball and they turn upfield and they're running in that direction like a running back, everything's exactly the same. Everything's exactly the same. So this idea that this could only happen to a running back is just simply objectively false. And I think Johnathan Hutton himself would recognize that if he got out of his feminine lens and looked at it through an objective masculine lens. He'd go, yeah, you're right. It's bad. I feel bad for Nick Chubb, but this is what football is, and this is what he agreed to do. So the idea that the way Johnathan Hutton frames it is, it's a woe is me victim thing. Look at, they get all these things and I don't get any of that stuff. That's what the feminine lens does. It distorts reality to elevate you. But if you look at it in an objective world, a lot of that isn't true. All right, let's continue.
Wedge, all that's gone. But you can take the hit like that to one of your highest paid players on a roster, and it's deemed fine and part of the game. That's their argument. Their timing of it is way off. A lot like the NFLPA in general. But when I see all the comments from players, and look, I'm not knocking the comments. The sentiment is, man, this is awful for him. This is exactly why they're arguing for the pay. The running backs were ridiculed and laughed at over the Zoom meeting that they held.
Does it matter that is the fact that they were laughed at over their Zoom meeting worth another $1 million? You see my point. Everything that Johnathan Hutton is putting, yeah, you may feel sorry for the guy. You may sympathize with Nick Chubb for. But does that equal, well, gee whiz, I should give him another $1 million because they laughed at him on the Zoom meeting? And for me, it makes it clear where Johnathan Hutton's head is, what his perspective is. It's a feminine perspective, a victim perspective. Woe is me. That's why I think a lot of this is faulty, because it doesn't translate to a dollar figure, at least not the way I understand it.
I was harping on the fact that they held it later than when they should have, but you also have running backs who are underpaid looking at Patrick Mahomes getting the contract we reworked yesterday. By the way, Patrick Mahomes remains underpaid.
Okay, we're going to stop there because that's the main point of all of this. Johnathan Hutton just made a declarative statement that Patrick Mahomes is underpaid. He's also making the case that Nick Chubb is underpaid. The question is, should you believe that? And if so, why should you believe that? I did a video on this, I don't know, probably a couple of years ago. But it was titled Show Your Work. And the idea was, when I was in algebra class and was doing terribly, what the Mr. Boone would do was you'd get your test and you'd have to work stuff out and then you give an answer. Well, if you gave an answer and didn't do any, work to get that answer, you just guessed or something like that, you'd get that wrong. And then it would say, show your work. And the point he's getting at is, I don't want your answer. I want to know how you got to that answer, so I can see if it's really a good answer. In the same way, when someone like Johnathan Hutton or anybody makes some sort of a declarative statement that this is true, the first question you should be asking is, I want to see the work. How did you come to that conclusion? And that work should be represented by very logical arguments, data that you can look into, something that you can see, that you can examine, just like if you're in math class and Mr. Boone wants to look at your exam. Mr. Boone should be able to get your paper, go through everything you've gone through, and see why you've come to that conclusion. When Johnathan Hutton says Patrick Mahomes is underpaid and just stands there on that, the next thing out of his mouth should be, well, because I worked out all the numbers, I saw what franchise, what they're making, what they're taken out, I saw ROA, all this financial data I've looked at, and I've come to this conclusion that he's underpaid. Now, if he hasn't done that, then it's a feminine thing. It's a victim thing. It's an emotional thing. There's no evidence that supports it at all. This is no different than what Megan Rapinoe did from the women's U.S. soccer team. It's this thing that I just am not being affirmed because there's somebody else getting more than me. It's jealousy, it's envy, it's all of those things. No facts, no figures, no data. As a matter of fact, when you looked at the data of what the U.S. women team was being paid, they were being overpaid. They were making way more by percentage than what the men's U.S. team was making as far as what they were taking in. So when you look at the facts and data, it didn't support their conclusion of the U.S. women's soccer team. Similarly here, Hutton has zero data. He's just making these emotional assertions drawn from his empathy over what happened to Nick Chubb. And the ironic part about it is Nick Chubb probably doesn't even know Hutton exists. Do you think Nick Chubb would spend any time worrying about what Johnathan Hutton is making? How much money? It just blows me away when you have just regular folks doing regular jobs, whining and crying about how much millionaires should be making. It's crazy to me. And again, I don't care either way. But here you've got Johnathan Hutton on the stump trying to get running backs more money and quarterbacks who's making, I don't know what he's making, $400 million. This, what's the guy, Mahomes? What does he need, 410 million? I mean, at what point can Johnathan Hutton go to sleep and going, okay, good. They're all making the right amount of money and I'm okay right now. It's stunning to me that he's so upset about this. And again, if they've got twice what they were giving them, I don't care. Whatever the owners want to pay these guys, that's between them. It stuns me that Johnathan Hutton can get into this emotional state over this bad injury and go, boy, if we gave this guy another $25 million, boy, that would solve all the problems. It's not a logical way of thinking, unfortunately. And again, I'm not banging on Johnathan Hutton. Well, I am, but there's a lot of people who think like this in the media. You talk to your friends, all these people. And it just doesn't seem like a logical way of thinking about the issue, especially when you start with the fact that they agreed to it.
But you also have running backs who are underpaid looking at Patrick Mahomes getting the contract we reworked yesterday. By the way, Patrick Mahomes remains underpaid. You still make that argument that he's underpaid for the Kansas City Chiefs and the value that he brings to them is more value than any player in the NFL currently for that roster. Point being, they're not getting what they should be getting because they don't band together and actually work at getting something done.
Okay, let's look at this overpaid thing or underpaid. What does that mean? Because Johnathan Hutton says this like it's this declarative statement, as if it's true and needs no evidence. That's never the case, especially when anybody is making these kinds of claims and these kinds of statements. It doesn't seem unreasonable that they would bring along, here's the data. And the whole point was, when somebody says things like this, just ask them, how did you get there? You know, when I was in Mr. Boone's algebra class and I would put an answer down, if I guessed, he would say, show your work. I'd get no credit for it because it's not the answer. It's how did you get to the answer? That's the important thing. And the same thing here with Johnathan Hutton. Okay, he thinks that Patrick Mahomes is underpaid. Can I see your work? Can I see the financial data? Did you go through the books of the Chiefs and what they're taking in and the ROIs and all that stuff? Because if he has, that'd be interesting to see. But if he's just saying this because that's how he feels, this is just emotional, feminine energy. That's all this is. I'd like some facts. I'd like some data. And the fact that, people got laughed at on a Zoom call doesn't match up. As a matter of fact, there's no sense of the word underpaid that applies to any NFL player. And this is what I mean. Like I alluded to before, there's nothing that's going on here financially with anybody that they didn't know when they signed the contract. If somebody comes to your house and says, listen, I'll mow your lawn for $25, and you look at your lawn and go, sure, $25 seems reasonable. At the end of the day, if you give them $25, there's no sense of the word where they can be underpaid. Not at all. Even if, while they're working, they find out that, boy, they're doing a lot more work than what they thought they'd end up doing. Doesn't matter. $25 is what you agreed on. $25 is what you give them. No one's underpaid. Now, if you gave him $24 or $22 or $15, then he would be underpaid. Similarly speaking, if Nick Chubb is getting every dime of his contract, not underpaid. Neither is Patrick Mahomes. They're getting exactly what they agreed to get for the thing that they're doing. Now, what about this issue of that some people will bring up? Well, so-and-so outperformed their contract. Maybe when they signed the contract, the employer thought the employee was just going to give them this much, and it turns out they've given them much, much more. They're not underpaid. Because when they made that agreement, the possibility that they would be better than they thought was always there. It was inherent. That's why you should have incentives in your contract. If you do better than what you're expected, you should get more. But that should be in your agreement. If it's not in your agreement, you're not getting underpaid. Not even a little bit. Here's the other side of that. What happens when players get signed to an agreement and they underperformed? They giving any of their money back? Don't think so. Are they going, you know what? I'm overpaid. Here's $2 million. I really stunk this year. Does that ever happen? No. Just when they're underpaid, that's when you hear them start chirping up. That's why I could give a rip either way. Owners give the players whatever they want. The players, if you don't like it, open up your airplane factory, whatever it is, whatever you want to do. But this idea that I'm underpaid, that Johnathan Hutton seems to be the case, there is absolutely zero justification for that argument. Now, you can make the argument that I want more money than I'm getting. I want more money than I'm signed for. Fine. If you're at your job and you go, you know what? I'd like to get more money for what I'm doing. You go and make that argument to your employer. But I would suggest don't use any of the arguments that Johnathan Hutton has used. Don't go in this woe is me, feel sorry for me, look at them, look at that. You might get an employer who will pay you on that. But it seems better that you should go in convincing your employer or demonstrating to your employer why it's beneficial to your employer to pay you more money. That seems to be a better way to go about it. And usually that means that there's somebody else out there who will pay you what you're asking for doing the same thing. Now, if you got that kind of setup, you're golden. So if you want more money, nothing wrong with that. if you've signed a contract and you're getting paid what that contract says, there is no sense of the word where you're underpaid. That's impossible. It's agreement. So I'll end it with this. I think it's Matthew chapter 20, verse 1. There's a story about a guy who owns a vineyard. And he needs people to work in his vineyard. So he goes out, sees a bunch of guys standing around, says, listen, if you go work in my vineyard at the end of the day, I'll give you $50. So they look at each other and they go, sure, why not? It sounds great. So they go start working in the vineyard. A few hours later, this vineyard owner finds a whole bunch of other guys. Says, hey, if you go work in my vineyard at the end of the day, I'll give you some money. Doesn't say $50, but just says I'll pay you at the end of the day. They're like, sure, we're not doing anything else. Why not? So they go start working in the vineyard. A few hours later, same things happen with a third group of folks. You work in my vineyard. At the end of the day, I'll pay you some cash. They're in. So the end of the day comes now, and the vineyard owner is paying folks. He pays the people who got there last, pays those guys first. Gives them $50. Now, the people who got there in the morning, they're rubbing their hands together going, man, we're gonna make bank, because we were there long before they were there. Second group of people show up. They get paid $50. The guys in the morning, they're going, boy, we're gonna really make a lot of cash. The folks who were in the morning show up to get paid. They get $50. They're pissed. They're going, we were here longer than those other folks, and they're getting the same amount of money. That can't be fair. Now, I got to tell you, I get it. I sympathize with them. I would feel exactly the same way. But the vineyard guy says this. He goes, I paid you exactly what we agreed that I would pay you. So how can you be upset? What are you mad about? I said I give you $50 if you worked all day. I gave you $50. What are you mad about? He further goes on to say, how is it that you, the person I hired to work for me, is going to tell me how much I'm supposed to pay you? It's his money. It's the vineyard owner's money. Why would the person working there tell the owner how much they're supposed to get paid? That's a tough argument. That's a hard argument. I think that story captures a lot of what's going on here. You've got running backs who've signed a contract and now want more money and think that the owner should pay them more. Listen, that's fine. The point I'm making is there's nothing that's going on that's unfair. And that's, I think, sort of the flavor that Johnathan Hutton is trying to argue, that somehow what's going on with these running backs is unfair. And I'm simply making the case there is nothing unfair about what's happening to these running backs. Now, they may want more money, nothing wrong with that. But there's nobody in the NFL that is underpaid. Not if they weren't forced into their contract. All right, that's enough out of me. I ran on way too long about that. But again, if you think I'm missing something or have a different opinion or a different viewpoint that I'm not seeing, would love to hear about it in the comments. Please like, please subscribe, and share it to other folks who may want to be, share it to other people if you'd like. Other than that, that's all I have for you. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time. And that's it. Get out of here.